Hi, I'm Allison, and I'm going to be talking about the soundtracks to the main series Pokemon games. This past February marked the 20th anniversary of the release of the first Pokemon games in Japan. I was lucky enough to be around for the celebration that happened at Nintendo New York and Rockefeller Center, and when I came home I realized I had way more to say about my love for this series than I could fit into a reasonably sized Facebook post. So as I tried to translate my feelings into words, I realized pretty quickly that one of the main reasons I still find myself drawn to these games at age 21 is their soundtracks. Although some themes and ideas are repeated, like the Gym and Pokemon Center themes or the use of 3/4 time and surf themes, each of the main series games has a soundtrack with its own distinct sound to it. I feel like background music in video games can sometimes be easy to ignore or take for granted, but in the case of Pokemon, it really adds depth to the experience. I feel like a soundtrack is also something you could, as a game developer, pretty easily cut corners on, but the series creator Junichi Masuda is also its main composer, and he has talked before in interviews about the importance of the game's music invoking a certain feeling, and the interplay between a setting or an event and the music he makes to go along with it. Almost every town, every route between towns, every event, and every major character gets their own theme in each game, and each theme is nuanced and beautifully constructed and deceptively simple and written with a really great pop sensibility. I wasn't really allowed to play video games as a kid, but I found plenty of other ways to incorporate Pokemon into my life, the most significant way being that it taught me how to draw. I finally got the chance to play Pokemon Blue around age 11 thanks to the immense kindness of my good friend Julie, who loaned me her game cartridge. I felt like I was experiencing history as I started that game, and I set out on my first adventure with my Bulbasaur named Ringo in what is perhaps the most underdog thing to happen ever, and with the same guide that had been my drawing reference Bible since age 5. However, after beating Blue, I wouldn't play another Pokemon game until I was a junior in high school. I began Crystal version with the intention of it being a time killer, but having developed actual musical taste since playing Blue in middle school, this time around I paid close attention to its soundtrack, and by the time that happened I had already fallen in love with the game's colorful graphics and its much appreciated small improvements on Gen 1's mechanics. So although I better understood the nostalgia of my friends and classmates who grew up with these games, that also meant I was completely hooked on Pokemon again. I think it was when I first heard the poignant and classic-sounding National Park theme that I realized just how special this game was. With just the 4 sound channels on a Game Boy Color, the game's creators had composed an intricate and emotional soundtrack. It didn't matter that I was almost 17 when I began the game. The pure wonder I felt while playing it was childlike, and the thrill I felt experiencing a new world in the first half of the game was balanced out almost exactly with the intense nostalgia I felt during the second half. I think this feeling is best exemplified in the Route 26 and 27 music, which, while triumphant and forward-looking, also invokes an extremely bittersweet feeling. At least to me, it simultaneously seems to move forward and look back, just as the route leads from the player character's hometown to a new journey and new challenges, and just as the player themselves moves from the freshly explored Johto region to their old home of Kanto. I didn't think my first experience playing Blue had affected me that much, but it killed me to experience the same world of the first generation games in bright colors and to hear its music expanded upon so beautifully. Although the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color had the same sound capabilities, and the Gen 1 music remained essentially the same, there were lots of small flourishes and harmonies added in which only deepened the nostalgia I felt for those original games. The battle with Red atop Mount Silver also moves forward while looking back, if in a much more intense way. The way that you, the player, are literally battling your former self seems to be reflected in the chaos of the song. It mimics Red's lack of dialogue and the tense negative space at the beginning of the song, and as it picks up, it almost seems to collapse on top of itself. To me, it sounds like the way your head would spin had you suddenly realized just who you were fighting against and just how powerful he was. After beating Crystal, I played through 3 more generations of Pokemon games over the course of a year, and although I couldn't imagine myself enjoying another soundtrack more, each game's unique sound grew on me without fail. My first journey through the 3rd generation games in the Hoenn region a few months later was no less exciting. It introduced so many special Pokemon, the world felt really lush and inviting, and the music was nothing short of epic. It filled me with the sense that I was really doing something big. Although these games are mocked quite often for their trumpet-heavy soundtrack, this is almost always done in a loving manner. The music sounds just as much of a product of its time as the original Pokemon soundtracks, but the introduction of brass and timpani and all these other instruments added a whole other level of emotion and sense of accomplishment to a soundtrack that would have already been super evocative in 8-bit. Traveling across the sprawling rainstorm-plagued routes 119 and 120 was never tedious because I was too busy feeling like I was on top of the world. And in between those highs were quiet and precious moments as well. The haunting abandoned ship theme perfectly captured its unease and its sad beauty. The delicate piano theme of Varan Turf Town was comforting and refreshing, and the waltzing surf theme was just classic sounding. Pokemon Platinum was an engrossing experience. The new sound capabilities of the Nintendo DS made room for an even vaster soundtrack that went to new extremes, in turn sounding playful, beautiful, and then jarring. I thought it was the nicest touch that there were small differences between daytime and nighttime versions of almost every overworld theme. The lower keys, subtler instrumentation, and slower paces added more feeling to the games, usually a tired one at night, but in some cases a more mysterious one too. The most striking location to me was Route 216 leading into 217, which was located in the northern part of the already far north Sinnoh region. It was irrelevant that I first played Platinum in the middle of summer. I felt completely immersed in the intense snowstorm as soon as I entered it. The music feature here went from quiet and thoughtful to freewheeling and joyous and almost ridiculous. I would sometimes listen to it while walking to class in the middle of unavoidable Rochester snowstorms, and it made me feel more purposeful and less weighed down as I kind of trudged through the insanity. The newly expanded Distortion world also blew my mind with its defiance of normal game physics and expectations of what a Pokemon region should look and sound like. The subsequent battle with Giratina also really shook me with its spidery, discordant, intense theme song, which is also the only instance I can think of in which a Pokemon song uses reverse tape effects. I think I was subconsciously expecting to hear big and intimidating music as you usually do in Pokemon games when I reached Sinnoh's Pokemon League gates, ready to take on the treacherous Victory Road. But instead I was met with a sparse and almost heart-wrenching song featuring only a piano, and I almost cried. I just love that music prompts a quiet moment of reflection in the player. The sound palette used for the Gen 5 games was richer than any other soundtracks, and with these broadened horizons, the composers were able to do some wonderful and creative things, especially in Black 2 and White 2, which I'm going to focus on because they are my personal favorite Pokemon games and the ones that introduced me to Gen 5. One of my favorite expansions of the previous game's soundtrack was the new theme that was given to each gym. The chord progression and main melody remained fairly consistent, but suddenly each gym's unique style became that much more obvious. A few examples are the percussion-free and floaty sound of the Flying-type gym, the uplifting dance music and model Elisa's Electric-type gym, the huge-sounding horns in the Dragon-type gym, and my personal favorite, the rock band that plays in the bassist Roxy's Poison-type gym. In what is arguably the best setup for a battle ever, you have to defeat her band members before you can challenge her, and as each one loses, his instrument cuts out as well, until it's just her singing and playing bass in the middle of the stage. Little details like these are another huge reason I love these games so much. When I finally battled the new antagonist Colress towards the game's end, all I could focus on was the music and how vastly different it was from any Pokemon theme I had heard before. The song seemed to be constantly evolving and changing, its chord progression unexpected, its instrumentation somehow reminiscent of metal or ice. I played this game for a long time after initially beating it, while among other things trying to complete my Pokédex, but I made the journey across the otherwise dead-end Route 18 almost every day to battle him, for the most part because I couldn't get enough of the song that played every time. The only battle theme that I think could hold a candle to his is the Champions theme from the same games. The backdrop as you battle Iris is quite literally cosmic, and the shimmering music captures that exact feeling of absolutely endless possibility. The battle didn't just feel like the pinnacle of Pokemon White 2. As corny as this sounds, I really did feel like it was also a culmination of the past year that I had spent falling in love with these games as well. As I was writing this, I had to keep reminding myself that I was talking about Pokemon, a series of video games about catching and training monsters. But I think one of the reasons this series endures is because there are so many different angles that you can approach it from, be it the competitive aspect, the collecting aspect, the visual aspect, the community aspect, or in my very specific case, the musical one. There's a record label that has released more than 5 double albums of dance remixes of these songs. There are rock and metal bands that cover these songs almost exclusively. There are fans who arrange them for orchestras to perform and then record them doing so. And the music works in all of these settings because it is so well written and because it stands so well on its own. And yet, having only had a few years to process these games, I already find myself feeling nostalgic when I listen back to their soundtracks. No matter where I am when I hear them, I am immediately taken to another world. My memories of these games and my journeys through them are inseparable from this music, and it's that combination of nostalgia and the joy of making new memories with these games and this music that has kept me obsessed with Pokemon for the past 4 years.